The column went live at midnight, December 16th, 2022. The Sun's website, millions of readers, Jeremy Clarkson's regular Sunday slot. The headline promised his trademark provocative take on current events. But what followed wasn't provocation. It was a nuclear bomb that would detonate his reputation, turn his own daughter against him, and create the biggest press complaint scandal in British regulatory history. The piece was about Meghan Markle, and it contained words so violent, so visceral, so deeply hateful that even Clarkson's most loyal defenders couldn't justify them. "I hate her," he wrote, "not dislike, not disagree with, hate." On a cellular level, he continued, "At night, I'm unable to sleep as I lie there, grinding my teeth and dreaming of the day when she is made to parade naked through the streets of every town in Britain while the crowds chant shame and throw lumps of excrement at her." Read that again. A 62-year-old television presenter, one of the most famous men in Britain, fantasizing in explicit detail about a woman being publicly humiliated, stripped naked, pelted with feces while crowds jeer. This wasn't commentary. This wasn't satire. This was a rape fantasy dressed up as a Game of Thrones reference. It crossed every conceivable line of decency and professional journalism standards. The visceral nature of the language shocked everyone. Clarkson had been controversial before. That was his brand, his calling card. But this was fundamentally different. This wasn't edgy humour or provocative commentary designed to challenge thinking. This was pure, unadulterated hatred expressed through sexual violence fantasy. It was the kind of material that should never have made it past any editor's desk. Within hours, the backlash began. Not from the usual suspects, not from progressive activists or woke Twitter mobs that Clarkson and his defenders love to dismiss. From everyone. Conservatives, liberals, royalists, Republicans, his colleagues, his fans, and most devastatingly, his own daughter. The unified nature of the condemnation was extraordinary. This wasn't a partisan issue where one side defended him while the other attacked. Everyone across the entire political spectrum recognised he had gone too far. December 17th, 2022. Emily Clarkson, Jeremy's daughter, influencer, writer, someone who defended her father countless times through previous controversies, posted on Instagram. Her words were measured but brutal. "My views are and have always been clear when it comes to misogyny, bullying and the treatment of women by the media. I want to make it very clear that I stand against everything that my dad wrote about Meghan Markle. She didn't call him privately. She didn't confront him in person. She publicly disowned his words while the article was still trending across social media. Her father, the man who raised her, who she loved, had written something so indefensible that staying silent would implicate her in his actions. It was a painful but necessary moment for her to distance herself from what he had done. This public statement made by his own daughter carried more weight than any external criticism could have. That's when the world realised this wasn't a typical Clarkson controversy that would blow over in a week. This was different. This was personal, ugly and spreading like wildfire. It was the kind of moment that defined careers, that changed how people thought about public figures and that exposed institutional failures at major news organisations. By December 18th, 48 hours after publication, the complaints to IPISO, the Independent Press Standards Organisation, had reached 6,000, then 10,000, then 12,000. The previous record for complaints about a single article was around 5,000. Clarkson was doubling it. The sheer volume of formal complaints was unprecedented in British press history. These weren't just angry people on social media. These were formal, documented complaints to the official press regulator, filed by thousands of individuals who felt the language was so egregious that it warranted official action. Politicians started weighing in. Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister of Scotland, didn't mince words. Deeply misogynist and just downright awful. No matter the woman, no matter the circumstances, no matter your view of her, this is not okay. She spoke with the authority of someone representing millions of people who shared her disgust. Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister, gave a carefully calibrated response that still condemned Clarkson. Language matters. I'm not going to repeat that language. Unacceptable. This was significant because Sunak was a Conservative, someone from Clarkson's own political tribe, and yet he couldn't defend what had been written. He had to speak out because the language was simply indefensible. Even Sunak, a Conservative, who generally avoided culture war fights, couldn't defend it. SNP MP John Nicholson went further, demanding ITV immediately sack Clarkson from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. This wasn't just media commentary. This was political action, calling for concrete consequences. Conservative MP Caroline Noakes demanded The Sun apologise and questioned whether anyone had approved the piece before publication. She was asking the crucial question, how did this ever make it to print? The answer to that last question would become crucial, because yes, someone had approved it. Multiple editors at The Sun had read Clarkson's column, signed off on it, and published it without a single edit to tone down the violent sexual imagery. That meant this wasn't just Clarkson's failure. It was institutional rot. It exposed a complete breakdown in editorial standards of one of Britain's largest newspapers. The editors and publishers who had the responsibility to protect readers from harmful content had failed spectacularly. December 19th, The Sun, facing advertiser boycotts, celebrity condemnation and unprecedented public fury, did something they almost never do. They removed the article from their website entirely. Not edited, not revised, deleted. This was damage control in its most obvious form, an attempt to make the article disappear and pretend it had never existed. The accompanying statement was brief. In light of the reaction to Jeremy Clarkson's most recent column, we have decided to take it down. We regret its publication. Regret its publication, that's corporate speak, for we massively fucked up and didn't realize how bad this would get. It was an admission of failure, delivered in the most sanitized and least accountable way possible. But removing it didn't stop the damage. Screenshots lived forever on the internet. Every news outlet had quoted the offending passage. The column was archived on multiple websites. The internet doesn't forget, and it certainly doesn't forget something this shocking and widely covered. And most importantly, Clarkson himself hadn't properly apologized. His initial response, posted on Twitter December 19th, "Oh dear, I've rather put my foot in it," and a column I wrote about Meghan, I made a clumsy reference to a scene in Game of Thrones. And this has gone down badly with a great many people. I'm horrified to have caused so much hurt, and I shall be more careful in future. Horrified to have caused hurt, more careful in future. Notice what's missing. I was wrong. I apologized to Meghan Markle. That language was inexcusable. There was no acceptance of responsibility. There was no genuine apology. He was treating it as a public relations problem to be managed, not a moral failure to be acknowledged. He apologized for the reaction, not the action. Classic non-apology apology. It was the kind of statement that makes things worse, not better, because it showed a complete lack of understanding about why people were so angry. And the Game of Thrones defense was laughable. Yes, there's a scene where Cersei Lannister is forced to walk naked through King's Landing while people throw things and chant shame. But Cersei is a fictional character in a medieval fantasy world. And even in that context, the scene is portrayed as brutal and dehumanizing punishment. It's not glorified, it's condemned within the narrative. Clarkson wasn't referencing it as commentary on media cruelty or the persecution of women. He was actively wishing it would happen to a real woman, repeatedly, with relish. There was no irony, no deeper meaning, just raw hatred. The complaints kept climbing, 15,000, 20,000, 20. The numbers were staggering. Then came the move that cut deepest, the one that showed Clarkson he'd crossed a line even his closest allies couldn't defend. Hammond and Mayer's Top Gear and Grand Tour co-hosts, his friends of 20-plus years, the men who'd stood by him through the BBC firing and dozens of previous controversies, stayed silent, publicly, completely, conspicuously silent. They didn't defend him. They didn't condemn him. They said nothing. Not a single tweet, not a single statement, not a single word. And in the world of celebrity friendships, saying nothing when your mate is under fire is the loudest possible statement. The message was unmistakable. You're on your own with this one, Jeremy. It was the moment when Clarkson realized that his career-long ability to survive controversy through the loyalty of those around him had finally run out. December 26th, Boxing Day, Clarkson published a second statement, slightly more contrite. I emailed Harry and Meghan in California to apologize and added that I'd be more than happy to meet them both whenever they liked. I tried to get this over as quickly as possible because, well, it seemed like the decent thing to do, but even this apology was strategic and limited. He emailed Harry, not Meghan, the actual target of his violent fantasy. He marked the email private and confidential, so nobody could verify what he actually said or whether it constituted a real apology. He was controlling the narrative, trying to manage the situation without exposing himself to further criticism. It was calculated and cynical. Within hours, a spokesperson for Harry and Meghan released a statement that eviscerated his PR attempt. We acknowledge Jeremy Clarkson's apology to Prince Harry, but a private email and a public tweet do not constitute a genuine apology, especially when his public statement failed to apologize directly to the person he targeted, Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. Translation: we see through your bullshit, Jeremy. They called out the strategic nature of his apology, the fact that it was carefully designed to minimize damage rather than genuinely address the harm caused. By year's end, the complaint count hit 25,100 individual complaints to IPSO about a single newspaper column. The previous record was shattered. This was now the most complained about article in British press regulatory history. No single piece of journalism had ever generated this level of formal complaint in the United Kingdom. But complaints are one thing, actual consequences are another. IPSO moves slowly, deliberately, bureaucratically slow. Investigations take months, rulings take longer. The wait began, with uncertainty about what the official ruling would be. January 2023. Clarkson announced he'd stopped writing for The Sun by mutual agreement. The column that had run for years, that had generated millions in revenue and web traffic, was over. He framed it as a mutual decision, but everyone understood. The Sun couldn't risk keeping him after that disaster. Advertisers were threatening boycotts. Celebrities were refusing to work with anyone associated with him. The brand damage was catastrophic. ITV, which airs Who Wants to Be a Millionaire with Clarkson, stayed quiet, but started distancing itself from him. No new contract signed, no renewal announcements. The show that had been a reliable earner suddenly felt disposable. Amazon, which produces the Grand Tour and Clarkson's Farm, also went silent. No public support, no condemnation, just strategic corporate silence that said, we're watching how this plays out before deciding your future. For the first time in decades, Jeremy Clarkson, the unsinkable, controversial, bulletproof entertainer who'd survived BBC firing, multiple scandals and endless controversies, looked genuinely vulnerable. His empire, built on decades of pushing boundaries, suddenly appeared fragile. Then came July 2023, 7 months after the column. IPSO released their ruling. The decision was historic. The article breached Clause 1, accuracy, and Clause 12, discrimination, of the editor's code. Specifically, IPSO ruled the column contained sexist language and prejudicial references to gender. This was the first time IPSO had ever explicitly ruled content as sexist under their discrimination clause. First time ever. This was unprecedented in British press regulation. The regulatory body had never before used its discrimination clause to explicitly condemn content as sexist. The ruling stated, the committee concluded that the references to the complainant in the columnist comparison constituted prejudicial and pejorative references to her sex and gender. The newspaper had failed to take care to avoid publishing prejudicial material. Translation: Jeremy Clarkson published sexist hate speech and The Sun enabled it. The regulatory body was making an official finding that the content was sexist and that the newspaper had failed in its duty to prevent such material from being published. The Sun had to publish a prominent correction on their website and in print, acknowledging the breach and the sexism ruling. It was a public humiliation for both Clarkson and The Sun. For a man whose entire brand is built on being unapologetically controversial, on pushing boundaries, on saying what others won't, having Britain's press regulator officially label your work as sexist hate speech is devastating. It was the ultimate validation of his critics' concerns. He wasn't just controversial, he was officially deemed a sexist. But the IPSO ruling included evidence of a pattern. This wasn't an isolated incident. Clarkson had a documented history of similar language about women in public life. He'd previously written about wanting Nicola Sturgeon shot. He'd called female politicians ridiculous and hysterical. He'd made countless crude sexual jokes about women's appearances and worth. The Meghan column wasn't an aberration. It was an escalation. The logical endpoint of years of unchecked misogyny that editors, publishers and audiences had tolerated because Clarkson was popular and profitable, and until he finally went too far. Today, in 2026, the Meghan Markle column stands as a case study in how reputation destruction happens, not from cancel culture, not from woke mobs, but from a man writing his own downfall, publishing it for millions to read, and then watching as even his closest allies couldn't defend the indefensible. Emily Clarkson still hasn't publicly reconciled that statement with her relationship with her father. The damage to their relationship remains private. The Sun lost credibility and advertisers. IPSO established a precedent for calling out sexism explicitly, and Jeremy Clarkson learned that there are lines even he can't cross without consequences. The 25 to 100 complaints weren't cancel culture. They were 25 to 100 individual people saying this is too much, this crosses from provocative into dangerous, this normalizes violence against women, and for once the system agreed with them.